A cardiac replacement procedure has a mortality rate of 2.4%. 24 is the gateway to heroic salvation, and the Pakleds are smart. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Seventh Rule with Cirroc Lofton.
Hello, hello.
My name is Ryan T. Husk, and today we're doing a review of Star Trek The Next Generation Season 2, Episode 17, Samaritan Snare, written by Robert L. McCullough, directed by Les Landau. This was May 13th, 1989. Where were you? And we have a very special guest today. We are so fortunate to have the writer of the episode, writer-producer, Robert L. McCullough. How are you, Robert?
I'm good. How are you? I'm good.
Amazing.
I have a thing on my screen that says this meeting's being recorded, which is great. And I'm pressing got it, the button, and man, it won't go away. But
that's a terrible start. But hit got it, and hopefully that will work.
Yeah. I'm hitting it repeatedly, but it's not going away. Isn't that funny?
Maybe you can move it.
Bizarre. Let's see here.
So while we're figuring that out, everybody.
Okay, got it. Now I got it.
Yeah. All right.
We did it, everybody.
Okay, cool.
So we do want to give a very special thanks at the top of this episode to our good friends Mars DeVore and Robert Kaiser. Robert Kaiser is all the way out in Austria, but he never misses an episode, even though it's like 2 or 3 in the morning. But thank you very much to Mars DeVore and Robert Kaiser for sponsoring this episode. We hope you love it. Let's get into this, right, Cirroc? First things first.
Let's do it.
Mr. McCullough, you wrote 2 episodes on The Next Generation, or you are credited with writing 2. One was the Icarus Factor. You are credited as the guy that created the Anbo Jitsu battle. And this one, the Samaritan Snare, that we'll get into a little bit more a little later. First and foremost, how did you get involved with Star Trek The Next Generation? Do you remember what that process was? And do you remember exactly what your role was? You produced basically the entire second half of the second season.
Yeah, that back in those days, writers were basically, everybody was a freelancer unless you got on a show. And an agent would send you out and you'd get certain assignments. And I did a lot of work at Universal, including Battlestar Galactica. I did a pilot called Orion, the Man from Galaxy 5. And I also worked on the Highlanders and things like that. You know, sci-fi stuff, which I never really considered to be sci-fi. To me, they're all just stories. Doesn't matter where they take place. And so I guess the fact that I was a very fast writer and I was available, I got a meeting with Gene Roddenberry, which was very interesting. He took me in his green and black Rolls Royce up to the St. James Club on Sunset Boulevard, and we had lunch, and he had about 6 martinis. And I was actually afraid to drive home with the guy, but he was a very nice guy, and he and I got along very well. He had a profound belief in everything he was doing. You know, he was an ex-cop, so it was kind of I was picking his brain a lot about his life as a cop because I also wrote a lot of cop shows. So I think he liked the fact that I was kind of playing up to his true biography. Long story short, I met Maurice Hurley, who was, I think, co-executive producer at the time. And Maurice was a very engaging guy, reminded me of the old comic Stan Freberg, had kind of the curly hair and a very wild personality. He and I didn't really jibe very well in terms of our writing approach, but we had great time in the room together. So he was kind of a likable guy. And part of getting the job, Ryan, to answer your question is, everybody can write, let's face it. I've got a keyboard, you've got a keyboard, but the question is, do they want to be in the room with you? Because you're going to be in the room for a long time with everybody. And if you're an insufferable bore or an arrogant putz, you're probably not going to get the job. What they want is, it's very much a fraternity, at least it was in those days. Today, I think it's worse today because of these writers' rooms with a half a dozen people sitting around trying to get along and everybody trying to get credit for something. Makes it a very competitive environment. It wasn't nearly as competitive in those days. It was much more collaborative. So I met everybody. Next thing I know, I got the job offer, and I had been doing a number of shows, kind of working my way up the chain of command in terms of authority and responsibility. And that's how I got the producer title. In fact, they had a very strong line producer. Rich Berman was around at the time. He was kind of a co-producer. He was also tied in with Paramount very closely. So he was kind of the purse strings of the show. Mm-hmm. And he was also very much aligned with Roddenberry, because Roddenberry really would just read outlines and go to the screenings. That was about the extent of his work when I was there. He was much more hands-on in prior years, of course, but by then we were kind of moving into toward the end of his career. So he was kind of letting everybody else do their thing. There were a lot of politics involved. I won't get into that, but that's how I got the job. Series of interviews that all went well. And the fact that I could write quickly, because they were always very, very, very far behind on scripts. One of the reasons being that Gene would take forever to respond to an idea. You would tell him something on a Monday, and you might hear back 2 weeks later whether or not that idea was a go for an outline, that sort of a thing. So,
Robert, what may I ask if was the first of all, let me just say that you're a good-looking guy with a great voice, so you could be a star actor yourself.
All right.
Yeah.
Well,
let me just put that out there.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that, but you know what, actors like you're an actor. You know what that life's like. No, thank you.
Yeah. People listening in right now and not seeing the video, just listening, you're missing out. Anyway, please continue, Cirroc.
But I wanted to ask you, when you were being schmoozed by Gene Roddenberry, what was the pitch that he was giving you about the show, or the kind of direction you wanted to go in?
His whole vision, the world of Star Trek, all of that. But I never told him that I had been at Paramount years before. My very first job was at Paramount as a gopher on a show you might have heard the name of, Mission Impossible. Whoa. It was the original Mission Impossible with Bruce Geller, and Peter Graves was the star, and guys like that, Martin Landau.
Yeah.
And we shared office space with Roddenberry's writing team in the same building on Paramount. And I would see the actors, William Shatner, come in to talk, or I don't know, get a drink out of the soda fountain or something. And they're wearing these Star Trek uniforms. They look like somebody's old pajamas to me. So I never really bought into the whole Star Trek thing. I thought it was kind of a goof. The fact that it ever went beyond the first 3 weeks was amazing to me. I had not read the scripts, of course, and it wasn't into the philosophy of it. But just from an appearance and production standpoint, it looks so rudimentary. It reminded me of when I was a child. I was 5 years old. I was on a show called Captain Zoom. And he was a guy who sold Bosco chocolate milk. And he would say, everybody drink your chocolate milk and we're going to go zoom into outer space. That kind of, it just reminded me of that. So I didn't really have a lot of respect for the franchise, frankly. But when I had that lunch with Gene, he really opened up his heart about how he wanted life to be better for everybody. And that Star Trek was really his vision of the utopian world that we should all be striving for. Okay, I bought into that. Wasn't sure how it translated into stories. And I read a bunch of scripts. The first day they hire you, here 25 scripts, go read these. And here's the show Bible, which was 200 pages thick. And it had architectural renderings of the starship. I mean, more detailed than you can imagine. I don't know, Cirroc, if they gave you that kind of stuff as a cast member, but my gosh.
A little bit, not that much stuff.
There was there was a whole culture into the whole thing. So you bought into that if you were going to be on the show as a producer, obviously. And my job was really to find good writers who could write quickly, efficiently, and didn't require me to do all the rewriting. So what was your question? I'm sorry.
No, that you answered my question, which was about, Gene Roddenberry kind of pitching the idea to you and selling you on the whole culture and the the mythology behind Star Trek.
Yeah. It was a philosophical lunch in some respects, because he gave me his whole philosophy, which I thought was terrific, that he really believed in what he was doing. No doubt.
Yeah.
No, Robert, I've got to ask you about the Pakleds here, because I don't know if you are aware of this, but there's a new Star Trek series called Lower Decks. And it is animated, and the showrunners, Mike McMahon, who also is doing Solar Opposites and who did Rick and Morty. But the Pakleds are back on that show, and they are basically the big bad of that series. I don't know if you know anything about this. Here's what they look like now on that series. So they have been revived. They are the bad guys. Now, the question is, where did you come up with the Pakleds, and did you have an idea of what they would look like in your mind, or did you just write, dumb people? And when you saw how they came out, was it close to what you had envisioned?
It was very close and better than what I envisioned, because I didn't envision the detailed makeup that the crew provided. I mean, the makeup I thought was pretty terrific. And to hear there's a new series featuring Pakleds, I want to know, where's my check? The whole concept of them came about. I think I wrote that after. I think it was the second episode I wrote, but I had rewritten and been involved in half a dozen or more episodes up to that point, and some of them were very, let's just say, they needed work, in my opinion, in terms of story and character, because if you don't believe what's going on with the real characters, with the people, it doesn't matter what the plot is, frankly. And so I was a little bit inured by then of the fascination with technology that the show promulgated to a great degree. There was so much stuff about technology that I just thought was not very interesting. And I thought, Captain Picard, the whole crew, they're all these freaking geniuses, they're flying around in galaxy, whatever, and they've got the answer for everything. Well, I didn't buy it, I thought everybody's got some flaws. Everybody's got some misgivings. Not everybody passed algebra. What if you had a bunch of people traveling through outer space who didn't pass algebra, right? So I wrote them as very obese, because everybody on the Starship Enterprise was perfectly fit. I mean, look at Riker. These guys are all trim. Nobody has a jelly roll. Everybody looked completely buffed. Which is appealing, certainly, but the world doesn't look like that. So I created these guys as being morbidly obese, I think is the description in the script, and dumber than dirt. How they even launched anything would have been a surprise to anybody. And then I'd also been aware of the fact that in LA at that time, there were a number of carjackings, people claiming to have car trouble. You'd pull over to help them, and they would rob you and steal your car, that kind of a thing. Well, what if that happened in outer space? So really, the Pakleds are a bunch of carjackers, frankly.
Perfect.
And so I just took a real life problem, threw it into outer space, and made these guys appear to be slothful, dumb, if you were inarticulate as can be, but beneath it all, extraordinarily clever. And that's how that came about.
Wow.
And the word Pakled, they're the kind who they're being led by the pack. We're all pack followers. We're pack animals. Kind of thing.
Wondering how you came up with that.
It's just. Well, listen. The idea came to me on a Monday. I had the script by Wednesday. It just wrote itself. It was very quick to write. And I also had my irreverence came through. The characters' names are actually the names of high school friends of mine backwards. That was kind of my inside joke. So I told my friends, after the show went on the air, I said, "Hey, did you see yourself on TV?" Like Reganog was the guy's name was Doniger, spelled backwards. His father happened to have been a prominent director back in the 50s and 60s. And then Grebneglov was really the name Goldenberg backwards.
Oh.
So
Goldenberg.
It wasn't that imaginative. It wasn't that creative. I'll put it that way. It was just me being kind of a smart ass, frankly.
It works.
And kind of my inside joke. Nobody ever asked about it. Nobody knew any of it. This may be the first time I've ever revealed that. My concern was that everybody on the Starship Enterprise was very technically oriented, but nobody seemed to have a liberal arts appreciation of anything, right? So I wanted to reveal a little bit of that for Picard. And I knew that the actor, if you will, had that background himself and would appreciate that. So I wrote that for him to just to reveal, kind of peel the onion a little bit about what really motivated him in kind of an intellectual way, not a technical way, because as I said in that scene, anybody can fly this thing. You just have to take the training, right? But do you understand why you're flying it? Do you understand why we're exploring the universe, why we're trying to expand ourselves? And that knowledge is really power, not technology. And the ability to acquire new knowledge is more meaningful than what we have in our hands today. So that was kind of my personal philosophical bent with that particular scene. And obviously, when you're writing these shows, you have to keep everybody alive. Everybody's got to have a scene that means something. And frankly, Picard didn't have a lot of stuff to do in that episode. So I had to give him something, and I wanted it to be something that kind of played to his strength as a person. When I say the actor, his person is very intellectual. If you had a meeting with him in person, this is a very articulate, well-read guy. And he never got to explore that in the character, at least until I had gotten involved in the show. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wanted to also ask you about the medical kind of terminology that was being used, because I was thinking to myself, this is a real mumbo jumbo medical, episode. Pathogenic implants, myocardio enzyme balances, and those kinds of things. And when you're writing that stuff, are you just kind of plugging in words, or do you have the kind of like background?
I used to be a neurosurgeon. No.
On top of all of that,
we totally leaned in though for a second there.
No, you make it up. That's fun because I had also worked on a couple of medical shows, and we always had tech advisors, and they always had this glossary of terminology. Do it this way; it's the only way. That kind of a thing. And I kind of wanted to spoof that a little bit. Again, I came at the whole thing from a very irreverent point of view, which was the mumbo jumbo is just mumbo jumbo, particularly medical terminology that when we're dealing with the 29th century, it's going to be completely different than it is today. So I just kind of reached for it, just kind of went for it. I almost used car parts as medical terminology,
You need a new radiator.
Exactly. That was my inclination, Yeah, for sure.
You did also drop a few word nuggets there. I'm glad you gave us the names of the Pakleds, because I was wondering where you got Reganad and all of these names from. It was just mind blowing, and thank you for that. But you also threw in some other ones like Far Space, Starbase, Earhart. So I'm assuming that's a nod to Amelia Earhart.
Yeah, exactly.
You did a Bonstell recreation facility, and I'm still trying to figure out if that's a plug to something, maybe your high school.
Yeah, that's actually, I think that's actually a park in North Hollywood. Right.
Okay.
Oh, wait, is it the one on like Burbank and Tahunga?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Right, it's right there. Yeah. There's now somebody put a console there to make it look like it's a holodeck. They put like a Star Trek console at that park.
Wow!
So that it looks like it's a holodeck console, and that the park is part of the holodeck.
Well, that's where the name came from. That's funny.
Wow! So that's the Bonstell Recreation Facility. we're peeling back the onions.
Right.
That is so amazing. Where did you start this episode? Where was the starting point for you? Was it about the development of Wesley and Picard's kind of connection there? Was it about Picard's surgery, or was it about the Pakleds? Where was the starting point for the episode?
It was the headlines in the paper: carjackings in L.A. You know,
Mm-hmm.
how could you be so stupid to stop on the freeway to help some guy with a flat tire? Well, that's what people did in those days. And 9 times out of 10 in that particular period of time, the guy with the flat tire would pull out a gun and steal your car, you know? So that's what really impacted me, because we're good Samaritans, we also open ourselves up to potential danger, you know?
Mm-hmm. Or in this case, the Pakleds took Geordie's gun himself, his own gun.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Aimed it at him. You know, here's something that I've been really wondering about. The character Sonia Gomez. She is in exactly 2 Star Trek episodes, or at least Star Trek The Next Generation episodes. The episode before this one and this one, and then that's it for the rest of Next Generation. But then she does come back as a captain in Lower Decks, the animated Star Trek thing we were talking about. So the story was that they were trying to make her more of a recurring character. You know, they introduced her in the previous episode, they brought her back here, and then we never saw her again for whatever reason. Do you remember if there was a conversation of, make sure to insert this new character, Sonia Gomez, into the script? Like, was it important that you incorporate her?
I do not remember, but I know I was very much in favor of Hispanic characters because, you know, half the world is Hispanic. I mean, Spanish is the second most widely spoken language on the planet. And I'm married to a Mexican, so who's also an actress at the time. And so I was interested in that kind of, you know, progressive casting and writing, frankly. I didn't know that she didn't survive the series, but I'm kind of surprised. You know, as Cirroc certainly knows, cast comes and goes kind of at a whim. It's very unpredictable unless an actor has a run of the series contract. Their survivability depends a lot on the writers, obviously, but also on I go back to getting along with people in the room, whether or not people like having them on the set, whether they get along with the series leads, and whether they're good, you know. So, I mean, some actors can carry dialogue and some can't. So the fact that particular character didn't last, who knows why? A number of factors. It's such a subjective business. I mean, I've seen really good actors, I mean, Academy Award-winning actors, not make it in television just because they can't show up that early, you know, because the hours are killers and they don't want to deal with it, or they bring an attitude based upon their past career to the current role. And that can be very detrimental and disruptive to the rest of the cast and the producers. So, again, it's all very subjective.
Bunch of regions, but you actually, you know, are one of the few people that wrote episodes for Diana Muldaur, who's, you know, only on the 2nd season, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
Another cast member that we see kind of have their run at the end of this particular season. And I thought you did a good job writing for her as well, because I did like the kind of trick you pulled on us at the end, where she is the specialist that is being brought in to help with the Picard, you know, surgery.
Right.
Kind of bringing her back around. She's like, I could do the surgery here. He opts against that, and it turns out they need her anyways, and they end up bringing her.
Sure.
So I thought that was clever as well, as far as writing, because I was not expecting that.
There were a lot of really good actors on the show when I was there. I mean, Jonathan Frakes was just the nicest guy. I'm sure you've heard that 1,000 times, but just a decent guy, happy to have the job at the time and worked hard. You know, he really cared. And he didn't, as a co-lead, he acted like a supporting actor. Like he was just happy to be there. And, oh my God, there's free lunch, you know, he was that kind of a guy, you know, whereas some of the other cast members, maybe not so much, you know.
Maybe less. Well, you'll be happy to know that Jonathan Frakes continues to work in Star Trek to this day. He had appearances as Riker in different series, including newer ones, and he is directing. He has a hand in directing all of the new Star Trek series. He is constantly working still, and everybody loves him.
That's cool. Well, he also, after Next Generation, he went out and had a directing career for quite some time, and he's done a lot of different things. Talented, hardworking guy, for sure. He deserves all the success he's getting, for sure.
Great to hear.
Yeah. That whole cast is really good. And actually, sometimes there's moments there where I see Will Wheaton and I'm like, wow, I see what's so great about him. And there's moments just where he gives you great facial expressions. He seems really honest and genuine in his emotional kind of sincerity.
Yeah, he was very young. I mean, he was just a kid when he was doing that, and I don't think he's not very active in the business any longer. I know he did a series. I think he did a whole bunch of podcasts or something talking about his career, which wasn't all fun and games at his age, And
I also want to compliment you, Robert, because a lot of the Picard backstory has had him, and I've mentioned this before, but it has had a lot of a kind of an elite upbringing type of perspective. And what you did in this particular episode is give an example of a story of his kind of hot-headedness, immaturity, a young Picard, getting into the fights with Nausicaans at a bar. And I thought that softens him up and makes him more relatable as opposed to
I mean, everybody exactly.
Yeah.
If your protagonist does not have flaws, you just have a cardboard cutout, because everybody has flaws. I mean, let's just look at, I don't know, in Braveheart, Mel Gibson's character, his flaw was he didn't know when to back off, and he wasn't smart. He was brave, right? Huge flaw, wound up killing him. So every protagonist needs to have a little bit of something off, If you look at, Top Gun, Maverick, a seriously flawed character. He had to overcome his flaws to succeed. And I think that's key. That's something, and I just want to mention this while I have some audience. That's something that we really deal with a lot at the Santa Barbara International Screenplay Awards, which was founded by my wife, and I do a lot of consulting on that. It's an online script competition, and we basically help writers bring their material up to the truly professional level. And one of the problems we see writers dealing with is the perfect hero, and perfect heroes, frankly, are boring. Nobody's perfect, and if your heroes are perfect, it's not a very good script. So that's something we try to do at the Santa Barbara International Screenplay Awards, is help people understand that writing is it's a textured process. Worst thing I can imagine as an actor, Cirroc, would be if you're just this ideal character and you have to portray this monolith of purity. It's just terribly boring.
I talk about Breaking Bad. I use that as an example. The main character, somebody that you're kind of rooting for, but doing bad things at the same time, has issues of morality that he's struggling to kind of go through gray areas of right and wrong.
And you have sympathy for him right away. You have sympathy.
Right.
Forget the fact that he has terminal cancer, but the fact that he makes such poor decisions. That he's so impulsive. Exactly. I mean, you got to feel for a guy who get a freaking clue, man. So that's kind of an important part of writing, I think, is understanding human frailty. Now,
there was also a sadness to Picard's tone that you gave us in this episode too. Sorry to cut you off, Ryan, but the sadness was almost about him not being able to get married and find love, and kind of the commitment that he makes to his career as opposed to trying to have any distractions. You mentioned that. You also highlight that in this episode, another long-standing kind of character-defining principle behind Picard.
Well, that's true of all of us. Back when the women's movement first started, it was, you can have it all. You can have a family and a career and a loving relationship. Well, that's false. Nobody gets to have it all. And those who try fail at almost everything they're trying, And you look at that, particularly in the world of celebrity in Hollywood, there's a reason movie stars are movie stars. Now, the reason is they have given up everything else to become a movie star and sustain that status. You don't see happy fathers with 3 children, and he's a Boy Scout leader, and he's a mega movie star, right? I mean, how many marriages has Tom Cruise had? How many marriages has Leo had? None, because he can't sustain a relationship because he's a movie star. So, and I think it's true of almost anybody in life. If you want to be a neurosurgeon, you're going to have to give something up. You know, you're going to have to give up poker night with the boys, because you can't stay up past 9 o'clock at night, because you have to be on your game at 6:30 a.m. every single day.
No deal.
Exactly. So Picard, to become the captain of the Enterprise, there's no way he could have had a family and all these other, a puppy at home and things like that, because he's too busy doing what he does. You know, which is really one of the characteristics of a hero. Somebody who's willing to, there's some self-sacrifice to achieve great things.
Yeah, it's the Superman, it's the Batman. They're not in a family household with kids running around. Right. They have to kind of give up that in order to be Superman or Batman and those kinds of things.
Here's an example, somebody that we all respect and revere. Man gave up a real personal life and ultimately his own life. Martin Luther King achieved things beyond human expectation, and look what he gave up, everything to do that, right? So it's true of all, again, heroic characters. They're not easy to write, because you have to do this to them and still get us to believe in their mission, you know. And so I think that's what helped Picard succeed for so long as a character, you know.
Absolutely. Well, Robert, I know you've got to go. We've got less than a minute with you. But on your way out, I do want to make sure that we point out what you were talking about, the Santa Barbara. It is Santa Barbara ScreenplayAwards.com.
Right.
Santa Barbara ScreenplayAwards.com. Everybody go check that out. It looks amazing. It said something like paradise for screenwriters or something like that, which everybody could use a little paradise. I do also want to point out very quickly, so you created the Pakleds. They live on. Sure. That legacy lives on. The other thing was the Nausicaan story with Picard. That lives on. They revisited that in a later episode called Tapestry, which is one of my favorite episodes ever. I even have the Captain Picard from that episode. But that story, that little story snippet you created lives on in a very famous episode, is the crux of the entire episode. But Robert, thank you so much for joining us and for taking the time today. We really appreciate it. We could listen to you talk way longer, but I know you got to go. So thank you very much for joining us.
Hey, guys, a lot of fun, a pleasure. May the force be with you. Wait.
No,
there
it is.
Okay.
All right. Everybody,
take care.
Well, hang on one second. Everybody stick around. We will be right back on the 7th Rule.